Joe Biden is the Democratic candidate for president, and now that his campaign is polling better than expected, the possibility of a Biden presidency grows. But what does that mean for America? What are his actual on-the-ground policies? Today on the Tonic Accord, we will discuss Biden's proposed tax increases, infrastructure deals, and other policies. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Tonic Accord. My name is Drew. I'm joined by my friend, colleague, and co-host, Alex Kapitko. Alex, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well, man. You know, life is good. A little stressed out about the pandemic, amongst other things, but staying sane. How about you?
Same. I mean, you know, it's it's a strange time, and I'm doing well. I'm doing well, but it's also very strange, and I'm just trying to hang in there. But let's dive right into this. So, you know, we've talked a lot about, you know, on this podcast, we like to talk a lot about like polling and attitudes, and especially when there was the Democratic debates, you know, who was winning over what voters. But now that we're at the point where we know the candidates that are going to be there on November, right? It's Joe Biden versus Donald Trump. There's no more trying to, you know, win the primaries or win over your own party. It's winning over America as a whole. And so, you know, Trump, we kind of have an idea of what he stands for just based on he's been president for 4 years. And we talk about him probably the most, you know, as many other, you know, political podcasts and news sites and whatever do. But let's dive more into Joe Biden and what exactly his policies are. So I don't know, where did you want to start? But I think probably the one that concerns or excites the most people would be his tax increases and his economic plan.
Yeah. So I first just want to say that I think it's pretty like just talking about Joe Biden in general, because I remember about a year ago now, because this podcast is officially over a year old now, which is kind of cool. And I remember we were talking back at the debates, you know, where Joe Biden kind of felt like an afterthought. Yeah. And so it really is interesting that he's been able to survive the storm. And I personally understand why. But I think it's ironic because both sides depict Biden and it's inaccurate. If you ask a Republican pundit or even a Republican, they will say he is a puppet of the far left that wants to defund the police and create Medicare for all, which is not true. If you ask someone on the more progressive side of the Democratic Party, they think he's too moderate. And I've even heard people say he's a closet centrist Republican. And in all honesty, I think he's a transitional president. That's in general what he is. He's a little bit Barack Obama. He's a little bit Bernie. He's a little bit Hillary. And he even has some things that are kind of going off the Trump administration's playbook. But on to the taxes. Honestly, this is one of the things why I tell my liberal friends he's not that centrist. This is a very progressive tax policy that he's putting out there. I mean, this actually, comparatively to Obama, this is a much more progressive tax plan. And so, I mean, I think the meat of what he's trying to do is repeal the major provisions from the 2017 tax cuts, right? The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the TCJA. And this reduced taxes for high-income households. And in a short term, it helped the middle class, but unfortunately they expired. And in the long term, to me, it looks like corporate cuts and rich people cuts. So the big takeaway I have from Biden's tax plan is that he wants to increase the income tax tax rate from 37% to 39.6%. And this would really only apply to people who make over $400,000. He also is going to be less friendly to corporations, which I personally, as a moderate Republican, have never had a problem with, mainly because I've always thought trickle-down economics was more of a myth than an actual fact. And his proposals would raise business income taxes by increasing the corporate rate and broadening the business tax base. And one of the things that I like the most about it is his proposals would also increase the tax rate on foreign profits.
Yep.
And that's one of the big things that I think is almost kind of a crossover between kind of the populist right, is that I don't think anyone in the United States, Trump or Biden, really wants all this money going overseas and allowing these companies to profit off of it.
Right.
But also, you know, he's extended the earned income tax credit for childless filers to individuals over age 65. His plan would raise the old age survivors and disability insurance tax roll to 12.4%. And like in general, I could go through it all day, but it's quite progressive. And to me, it seems like it's trying to help the little guy. And what I asked to my moderate friends is that Biden has helped see a recovery before with Barack Obama. And I keep thinking, which president will help the average Joe, no pun intended, get their life back on track? And to me, it seems like Biden is the answer. I don't agree with all of his taxes, but I do think it's a step because I didn't like Trump's tax cuts. I think they helped the wealthy, and it was a facade because in the short term, it helped the working class.
We also have to remember too about, like we had a major tax cut with the Trump tax cuts, and then we just had major stimulus bailouts that were needed. We're definitely needed, but we're looking at increased government spending with a decrease in government revenue. And I think that Biden's plan kind of gets back to, hey, we need to actually increase our revenue as the government again. I mean, we're spending more than we're getting back, and I understand that deficit spending, especially in a time of a crisis, is needed. Right? I understand that. Sometimes you need to make you need to have a deficit. But a deficit on top of tax cuts, especially large corporate tax cuts, can get a little dicey and a little worrisome. Yeah. So I agree that I think the best thing is that increase on the foreign revenue on American companies. I think that's huge. But I also think that part of this has to be closing loopholes, right? Because I do worry that maybe companies will just leave the United States to avoid this, like so many have already done before, right? Like I think Apple is headquartered in Ireland or something like that. But yeah, I agree that his tax increases would primarily fall on the top 1% of income earners. This is this is from that analysis of the American Enterprise Institute's analysis of Joe Biden's tax proposals. But it does say that the average American will have a tax increase. The trade-off then is, okay, where is that money going to? And I think that comes into play with his economic and infrastructure plans. He wants to spend $2 trillion on kind of he doesn't call it a Green New Deal for political reasons, but it's basically that is to combat climate change. He wants to restructure our energy systems to be more renewable, to train people in new jobs, to build these systems. And I think that's admirable. I think that's something, we have to take a serious look at. I do believe that the idea that we need to have consistent GDP growth as a nation to be successful is unsustainable, especially in a world where we're constantly having butting up against the environment and having more and more environmental problems and climate change issues. I don't think that old idea of always increasing is sustainable or even plausible. If you look at Forbes, we looked at that Forbes article where it says Biden's tax plan could cut S&P 500 earnings by 12%, which is a warning from Goldman Sachs. It sounds scary, but let's remember that they're talking about earnings by 12%. So Goldman Sachs would say their earnings estimates would fall from $170 profit per share to $150 per share. So it's not even like their earnings would go negative or it's just they'd go down a little. I'm sure that to financial guys this is super scary, but I don't think it's plausible to constantly have GDP growth and everything be 5% GDP growth to be successful. I think that to have a sustainable and sometimes equitable society, you do need to tax large financial institutions, high income earners, and use that money on good and responsible government programs that put people to work and put people in a better economic situation. I don't think you need to I agree with many conservatives, right, that if you just hand out money consistently all the time, it can lead to some people, not giving back to society. But as we've seen with the pandemic, at times it can actually be a huge help to those that are in need. And many people, got their $1,200, their Trump check, still want to go out back to work. They still want to go back out and get their life back together. And they needed that government help. So I don't know. I really do think that we need to have a change in our tax system. And I do think we need to redistribute some of the wealth. I know it's a naughty socialist term, but the amount of inequality I see in this country, especially with the 1% owning more than half of the nation's wealth, I think something like Joe Biden's tax plan is needed. And yeah, it might cut earnings down on Goldman Sachs by 12%, but I'd rather people get health care and people get jobs that are prepared for the future instead.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's interesting to bring it back to that Goldman Sachs, I guess, scare in the Forbes article that reported on it, is that I think that highlights the fact that the Trump tax cuts, this is basically Biden's candidacy and his policies and his potential victory are all a rebuttal of Trump's tax cuts. Because I don't know about you, but we're seeing Goldman Sachs is concerned, but I don't think the average worker is as concerned about Biden coming in and changing the tax system again. And I think that expresses the point is that Wall Street, like you and I talked about, I think over a month ago now, is that Wall Street is not just the barometer for how you run an economy. And, Trump's been bragging about this economy, and this great rebirth and this reconstruction of the American economy. And it's like, okay, but the fact that you've cut taxes, not only for the 1%, but for companies like Goldman Sachs, I think it's a false narrative that the economy's grown because wages have stagnated. And I have a personal connection with this. I've been working in Europe for a long time now, and well, I'm done now, but I've seen that, yes, GDP is not a great indicator of well-being and prosperity. It's an indicator of the strength of your stock market, thus your financial institutions and probably your global standing. But, a lot of Europe has a better balance, I think, between work and play. And I know that sounds very simple, but at the end of the day, I think there's some truth to it, is that the United States is richer than a country, say, like Spain, but Spain has a higher life expectancy. And you have to wonder somewhere along the road, is it worth this 9 to 5 work until you're ready to pass out life that is basically punishing people that can't take a day off, but it's allowing these giant companies to prosper. And that's why at the end of the day, I go back to, I think I don't understand the ridicule from the far left on Biden being too much of a centrist. You're right. He hasn't spoken out in great terms about these protest movements, or he hasn't been just a vocal ally, I guess you could say, on the front lines. But to me, it sounds like he does want to go back to almost an Eisenhower, JFK. I would argue in some ways the tax code and somewhat of this economic plan based around environmentalism are more echoes of FDR, Lyndon Johnson, and even Eisenhower than anything else.
Yes. People often forget that how high taxes were in the 50s, in the quote-unquote golden era of America. Now, again, we were also coming off of a major industrial boom after the Second World War. So, yeah, there's other factors, no doubt. But you're right that this does feel very FDR-like, or at least attempts to be so. I also think that you kind of hinted at earlier in the episode about how there are tinges of Trump's playbook in some of Biden's plans. And even in his economic plan, Biden is really trying to emphasize this Buy American, right? He gave a speech about a few days ago talking about, Buy American and trying to, have policies that leverage trade, tax, and investment and to spur domestic innovation. I'm going off of the New York Times reporting of this speech. And Biden is claiming that this would reduce reliance on foreign manufacturing and create 5 million additional American jobs. And he says, this is Biden quote saying, "I do not buy for 1 second that the vitality of American manufacturing is a thing of the past." He's really hammering in his blue collar roots, factory guys, union guys, but also, trying to buy American. And as much as I like that idea, it has to be a balance, right? Because we do live in a global world where we need to have, trade with companies from other countries, and you and I have studied Latin America in different ways, but we both know the worrisome of if you block foreign investment and you only promote your national industries, eventually they just don't compete on the global scale. If you protect them too much, right? And we've seen that we've seen that happen multiple times in Latin American countries where they only allow Nicaraguan cars or something, and then eventually people realize that Nicaraguan cars are not as good as Japanese cars. So I do believe that, like, one, I think it's political, right? Because, Trump is kind of on this thing that, like, the left is anti-American and not patriotic. Biden's kind of pushing back with, like, yes, I believe in American exceptionalism. I believe in American manufacturing. And, of course, he wants to win the Rust Belt. So there's definitely politics there. But I do think it's a worthy fight, right? To bring back American jobs, to stop outsourcing, and to make American products exceptional. But we have to be very careful that we don't protect our companies too much to the detriment that we're not engaging in global trade, and then while we're losing out to Japanese cars taking over the global market, while American cars are way too protected to then succeed.
Right. And I think we're seeing somewhat the pendulum swing when it comes to globalization and protectionism, mainly because I would argue that, especially during kind of the big neoliberal boom, kind of, you could say, the end of Carter into the end of H.W. Bush, so kind of the late 70s into the early 90s, we saw kind of just frivolous globalism without any care for, who's receiving the money or who's actually doing the job. And we're seeing kind of a backlash to that. And part of me sees it good that we're starting to actually realize that, first off, we do need domestic production of certain goods.
Yes.
I mean, we're seeing that with coronavirus, right? That probably the reason why China wasn't transparent about the early days of this was because they didn't have enough N95 masks themselves. And so the fact that we were so reliant on, say, for example, China for pharmaceuticals, masks, respirators, I mean, almost every aspect of the ICU bed, if you want to just name off parts, was from China. And so I think in some ways having at least a global supply that is maybe more centralized in your region is a good idea.
Yes.
But the problem is that both Trump and Elizabeth Warren, I remember, was even talking about this kind of Buy America movement, is that the problem is with every Boeing, there's also an Amtrak. And that was kind of what you were getting to, is that, Boeing's obviously a world leader. It's even had some flaws because they're so sped up on trying to be the next great, or like trying to produce the next good product, right? Like a lot of the issues with their software was because of that, this race to create the next product because it's such a global company. But then on the other side, you have Amtrak, which is a company that is far, 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 far behind European speed trains, far behind Japanese trains. I mean, Amtrak, in all honesty, is just crap. And so do we really want to prop up the Amtrak market when we could actually just be getting high-speed trains out of Europe, right? So there is a trade-off. I just feel like at least Biden has a plan, and I feel that I have some concerns, especially with kind of his environmental economic recovery. But in all honesty, I feel that while Trump is calling climate change a hoax, Biden sees it as a way to help people get better jobs.
Right.
And so there's a huge plus to me when I hear him, because I listened to some of his speech talking about this, and a lot of the logistics I think could be nearly impossible to actually carry out. But the fact that he sees it as a way to reinvigorate areas that maybe are ex-coal mining areas or struggling areas, I think that's a good plus. And, he has a 9-point plan for this quasi-Green New Deal, I guess we could say. And some of them are far stretches. And I understand why people on the right are worried about it. And part of me is worried about it too, is because obviously both of us believe that climate change is happening. And I believe that it's a pressing matter. But part of me wonders, is reinvigorating the entire economy either enough or not enough? And I think you could say yes to almost both of those at the same time in different ways. But I think the fact that he's willing to address it and maybe turn a negative into a positive is very FDR. Back to that. And also, like when he's talking about buy domestic and kind of this protectionist thing, it seemed to me more like he's trying to get electric cars to be the new fleet of the U.S. government and U.S. government employees, and try to subsidize this kind of green movement when it comes to automobiles inside of the U.S., incentivizing Americans to buy green domestic. And I like that. Now, throwing $400 billion over 10 years into this, I think that's going to turn off a lot of moderates. But like I said, at least he's talking about the difficult topics.
Yeah, I mean, at least he's shooting his shot. I mean, yeah, I'm reading some of the points of the plan, like achieve a carbon pollution-free power sector by 2035. That's real ambitious. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps that's what it takes, right? Like, okay, maybe we're probably not going to hit that mark, but at least you're shooting your shot, and maybe you get, maybe you significantly reduce carbon pollution in your power sector by 2035, or you make it
Mm-hmm.
carbon pollution free by 2050 eventually. Again, look, I mean, if we're talking about the two candidates, right? You do have one that just doesn't talk about climate change or environmental issues at all, and in fact doubled down on coal. I remember in 2016 he was like, we're bringing
Yeah.
back coal. Coal's not coming back, especially after the COVID pandemic. Coal is not coming back, and those people that voted for him in Appalachia and other coal parts of the country, they're continuing to lose their jobs, and they got duped. And I don't think doubling down on a dying industry, it'd be like Trump saying, the horse and buggy, we're bringing it back. It's like, no, man, like, these people that worked in these coal mines deserve to be retrained and repurposed into building, if they want to stay in the energy sector, to build clean energy. And so I do think, like, Biden is shooting his shot. And he's certainly, to that criticism from the far left, which is never ending. I remember I've even talked to some of my very progressive friends that they think, Bernie Sanders was too centrist, and Bernie Sanders sold out because he dropped out to where like, oh my gosh, when does it end? Like, you just want Fidel Castro at some point. So, I do think that, like, yeah, like I actually think Biden has shifted left recently. And he's certainly less of a centrist than Hillary Clinton was, in my view. As far as his, like, infrastructure plan, I think it's bold, ambitious, but I think right now we need bold and ambitious plans. And yeah, if they don't go the full way, at least we did something in the process.
Yes. No, I think we can both agree on that. And so the next part of his policies, and I guess just kind of where he's at right now in the nation, I want to talk about is the riots and his stance on police. Because I think, again, both sides are kind of misinterpreting what he stands for on this, especially the right, and especially Trump's campaign in specific. And, I think Biden's at a very interesting spot, because this is a very traditional, old politician, right? A white, old politician. And he comes, I think, from an interesting standpoint, because he's trying to balance this progressive movement that is very open and very willing to do what I would say is rightful change. But he's also trying to keep the moderates that he needs to win. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because I was listening to the 538 podcast, I guess earlier today, and they had a good point, is that their data from 2016 shows that one of the biggest reasons Hillary lost to Trump was because both of them did identity politics, but Trump was really good about white identity and nationalism, and Hillary kind of missed the mark on identity politics. And it's kind of interesting because Biden's actually been pretty focused the last couple of weeks on identity politics, but as a more encompassing message than specific groups. And I think a lot of people, even moderates like my father, for example, and then also younger people our age, do see him as kind of an intermediary. And to go off that, he hasn't had a deplorable moment. Right. He hasn't had this moment that's kind of a giant gap. I mean, he's had gaps, don't get me wrong. Like, he's had plenty. But he's had no one where he's like, I feel like Hillary almost had to energize the woke identity politics side of the party while completely discrediting the centrists. And Biden has done an amazing job of almost kind of balancing both. And obviously, yeah, you're going to have the far left still calling him not enough. But I think it's impressive that he is polling well with African Americans. Obviously, there's the association with Barack Obama. But I also don't think he's had any gaffes that are really detrimental. And now going on to the police thing, he's actually more interested in putting more money into the police, but also putting more funds into the community as a whole, which is kind of a term known as community-oriented policing services, or COPS. And now Trump's campaigns, have called him, defund the police, get rid of the police, which is just not true. Biden's always been a community policing guy. He believes in accountability inside of the community. He believes in putting funds into social services, education, substance abuse treatment, but also putting more money into training for the police. And that's why I actually think that Biden could do very well, because he's balanced the beam that Hillary fell off of.
Yeah, I mean that's a great analysis. And yeah, I mean his views on police have adjusted, but they haven't flip flopped. Like he's not calling to defund the police. In the 90s, he voted for a bill that increased 100,000 police officers. In 2002, he wrote an op-ed for Delaware State News and saying that what works against fighting crime is simple, more police on the streets, right? So something, he's been pretty pro-police for a long time, and I think that, yeah, he's probably had to shift his rhetoric around and, to the community-oriented policing. But I think he's done it well. Again, one difference is in 2016, Black Lives Matter did not have a majority support from Americans. Today, it does, based on polling. We don't, obviously polling can be flawed, but Black Lives Matter movement has a majority support of Americans today. So the public opinion on this issue is shifting, and so Biden has actually been pretty smart in saying, yeah, community policing, inclusivity of minorities. And I do think it's a mistake for Trump to go out full defund the police and stuff like that. He's making himself out to be this law and order candidate, where Biden has a pretty decent law and order repertoire, or at least you can view it that way. So it's a weird hill to go for. I do think community policing is a good idea, right? We talked a little bit about defunding the police, and yeah, I don't think we should abolish police officers. They serve a vital role in our communities, but that we need to adjust the way that policing happens. And I think community orientated policing is one way to do it. I think it's really interesting what you said about how Biden being a transitional president, you said?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting point because I think as this goes on, perhaps that is the better thing. I remember earlier in the campaign, or earlier in the election, especially the primaries, I more leaned towards Sanders because I thought Biden was too milquetoast and middle of the line, and Sanders was that flawed but vibrant and fiery populist rebuttal to Trump. But the more time goes on, and we realize how detrimental and dangerous populism on either side can be. Yeah, I think you're right that Biden is fitting into that lane of being a transitional president, and has the ability to do that way better than I think Hillary did. And I think he might be kind of what America needs after Trump, especially his ability to connect with blue collar people and that whole Buy America First and kind of rebuild the and what you said about identity politics is Biden does talk about race issues, but it's very inclusive, and it's not it doesn't sound so far as very antagonistic. He's not calling Trump supporters deplorables, right? He like you said, he doesn't have his deplorables moment. So I think he is trying to position himself to be a unifying figure, and he's at least doing it better than Hillary did so far.
Yes. And now I do want to turn it to kind of the fears that some of us have on the more conservative side of the aisle.
Please.
Just because I feel bad if I don't miss it. Is that so we talk about the pendulum, right? And I'm worried because, like I've told you, is that I would say 90% sure that I'm going to vote for Biden, unless some third party candidate just jumps in and grabs my attention, because I just could never vote for Trump. But my fear is that I'm curious if Biden is going to see, okay, this is all hypothetical, talking about his victory. I'm curious that if Biden would see it as him being kind of more of a situational president, because that's what he is. Let's be honest. Transitional, situational, I think they're all pretty similar.
Yeah.
Americans are dissatisfied with Trump. They're scared about the economy, and they're worried about coronavirus. Almost every poll I've seen says that. Even on conservative sides, they still trust Fauci over Trump. And so what I'm worried about is that Biden may take a victory as basically an acceptance that his policies for the last 40 years are good, and that what he needs to do is really enforce those. And in some ways, he just needs to be this transition. And I really hope he does that, and I really hope he understands the time. And I do think he does. But, he's set up these task force with Bernie, which I know you're definitely more of a Bernie guy than I am. And I've seen him. He wants Greta Thunberg on his climate council. He wants AOC on there.
No,
And
I'm worried about that
and
too. Believe me, I'm worried about that too.
yes, yeah, man. I mean, it's just like that's my fear is that I'm worried that he could see this as transitional, but he also may see this as an opportunity.
Well, I think that like that Bernie task force. I mean, it's a task force made up he's not on, he's not president yet. It's a task force to give him policy ideas and proposals while he's a candidate. I think that stuff and the Greta Thunberg thing is almost entirely political. It's just that stuff is about image to me. And I think that the likelihood of, Bernie Sanders being a major part of the Biden administration if he's elected is low. Elizabeth Warren more so. I mean, definitely Biden is trying to get his progressive wing base underneath him, right? That umbrella. But I really don't think that once he's elected, Biden would push for very radical change. I think he's in the same kind of school of thought as Obama, which is 2 steps forward and then 1 step back is still progress, right? Obama was very like, yeah, well, we didn't get all the things we wanted to get done. We had to drop some ideas. We had to compromise a lot. But in our opinion, it was still progress. And I think Biden is of that same school of thought, whereas Bernie Sanders is more of the all or nothing kind of camp. So yeah, I know it's a little bit worrying to see that Bernie Sanders was on that task force, and there was an interesting and kind of strange baby bonds program that I was like trying to read about. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but I guess it's like trying to go against racial inequity with like government bonds of certain babies that they get over time with like a government bond program.
Jesus.
I'm not sure how that plays out. So, if anyone is more educated on that policy proposal idea, I'd love to hear it. But, that's coming from, again, Bernie Sanders' task force of a candidate who's not yet elected. It doesn't mean much in the way of like the major planks like it does, his tax increases, which you can bet your ass he's going to try and get through. We'll see if it happens. But, he's pretty adamant about reversing the Trump tax cuts. So, yeah. I mean, all in all, I do think that, like, look, if Biden gets elected, you're going to see a dip in the stock market. You're going to see a lot of, of the financial elites worrying about things. And they'll spin it. I'm sure they'll spin it as, our economy is about to go down the tank. But again, I don't think that Goldman Sachs is the only barometer for economic success. I mean, for so many, millions of Americans that don't even have money in the stock market, it's a different reality. So yeah, I mean, Biden, I think is trying to balance on that beam, like you said. He's doing it better than Hillary. We'll see how it plays out. I still think he's going to have a tough time in the debates because of just he is gaffe prone. But as far as his policies, I've been increasingly more impressed with his policies as time goes on. And I think it's because he is taking bolder stances and he has a real message. Again, that build American message is so much better to me than I'm with her. So we'll see how it plays out. But, his policy planks are interesting, unique, and I think, in my opinion, a hell of a lot better than Trump's. Yeah.
Amen. And we can only hope. I like Biden's, I would say 75% of his career I would agree with, and I hope to see more of that than kind of the political sways of the time.
Yeah.
And I'll just leave it on this point is that, talking about Mr. Orange Man Trump, I've been kind of looking at what he's been talking about, and he's been asked twice now by Sean Hannity on what his second term would look like. And now Sean Hannity's thrown him just simple softball questions. And still Trump cannot really seem to answer what he wants to do. And it doesn't give me much confidence. He talks about bringing judges, building the wall, protecting the Second Amendment, rebuilding our economy, rebuilding our military, and defeating coronavirus. First off, he's kind of lost to coronavirus. And second, wasn't building a wall, protecting the Second Amendment, rebuilding our military just parts of 2016's campaign? Yeah. And so if he's done all this already, he might as well not run. So the fact that he's running again tells me that he did nothing and he has no plan. And that's something that makes me sleep better at night, is that Biden has a plan. And I don't like a lot of the progressive agenda on the left, but I don't think Biden is part of that. I really hope he's not part of that, and I think he's what our country needs, like you said. And we're just going to have to kind of see. But I just worry what another 4 years of Trump would do, not only to our international status, but what it would do to us as individuals.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I think that having an episode like this is good, and I think that when Trump gets a clear idea of his plan, which will probably happen around the convention, right? The convention is kind of when you lay out your planks. We should have another episode on that and look at just what are Trump's plans, what are his policies, and how has he done them in the last 4 years or not. But there is some blatant ones that like the build the wall, that you're just like, dude, like, I would just drop that idea altogether, man. But yeah, we'll see. But let us know your thoughts, listeners. I understand that there are listeners that don't like Biden. We would love to hear why. What are some of his policies that scare you? I know that tax increases, no matter who you are, can be a little scary, even to myself. But we always want to dig deeper into where's that money going and what for. And please voice any of your concerns or your praises for these policy ideas. Or if we missed anything or got anything wrong, feel free to add in your thoughts. As always, you can find us on Podbean, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, plenty of other third-party sites if you just Google Tonic Accord Podcast, YouTube, and stay tuned. We have plans to have guests come on in the future, and we're going to be experimenting with perhaps some maybe more aesthetic changes. So definitely stay tuned, and thank you again for listening.
Take care.